Welcome to the LDA Podcast, a series by the Learning Disabilities Association of America. Our podcast is dedicated to exploring topics of interest to educators, individuals with learning disabilities, parents, and professionals to work towards our goal of creating a more equitable world. I'm here today with Dr. Nancy Cushen White. She is a clinical professor at UCSF. She's a certified instructor for Slingerland Multimodal Structured Language Approach. And she's here today to talk to us about handwriting and dysgraphia. So thank you for being here, Nancy.
Thank you for inviting me.
So to start off, could you explain dysgraphia and how it affects handwriting?
Okay, well, first of all, handwriting is partly a motor skill, but it's more than that. So letter forms are stored and processed in working memory, and it's the same letters that would be processed for reading and spelling, but they also play a role in handwriting.
Right.
So the orthographic loop, think of it as the mind's eye, where letters and graphemes are stored and processed in working memory in connection with the sequential hand movements for forming the letters, the movement of hands and the fingers. Dysgraphia is impaired handwriting, and that can interfere with written spelling, but it can also interfere with the speed of writing as well as the legibility. And dysgraphia may occur alone, with dyslexia, with an oral language difficulty, or with both. Right. Dysgraphia, in addition to the impaired handwriting part, the part that deals with spelling, is orthographic coding. And orthographic coding involves that same working memory we talked about for the same letters that are going to be involved in reading and spelling. But in addition to that when they're in working memory, we can manipulate them. So it's like that mind's eye, you're seeing them, you can move things around in the short term, and then eventually that develops a permanent memory for those words so that you can access them. But it's not just the visual image of them, it's in combination or connection or integration with their pronunciation and meaning. And then, of course, when the handwriting comes in, there's the sequential movements for forming each of the letters. So when we're talking about dysgraphia, we're talking about the motor skills, but people with dysgraphia may have problems with one or both. They may have trouble with the orthographic coding for spelling, or with the planning the sequential finger movements for writing, or both.
That's good to know. So there's two parts. So could you talk a little bit more about the studies that support integrated handwriting instruction in K through 12?
In 2016, Wolf, Abbott, and Berninger did a study on classroom instruction. There were two studies. The first study looked at first graders, and they taught manuscript handwriting, letters, and that manuscript instruction was embedded within a multimodal approach for teaching spelling, reading, and composing, and composition. In addition, and that was the comparison group was just a business as usual. They also got manuscript handwriting instruction, but it was not systematically related to the other literacy activities. Both groups improved on automatic alphabet writing. The treatment group, however, improved significantly more than the control group from the 2nd to the 9th month of first grade. And the treatment measures were dictated spelling, so they were writing spelling words, and recognition for reading of word-specific spellings among phonological foils. And then study 2 looked at those same first graders that received the systematic instruction along with the manuscript, and gave them a second year of instruction, still embedded within the multimodal structured language lessons, and then there was another group who got cursive. So they had a year of manuscript, a year of cursive, not embedded within. And the first group had 2 years. And the kids, not surprisingly, I suppose, for people who teach them, results are discussed in mastering the handwriting format before introducing another format. So those kids who had a year to learn it and then a year to practice it became much more automatic.
Right.
and they were able to use it functionally at higher levels than the students who only had 1 year of each. And these were not necessarily kids diagnosed with a learning disability. These were regular classroom, just beginning first, second graders.
Oh, wow. Well, and that already sort of answers my second question here. It's a digital age now. There's a lot more on computers and typing. So why is handwriting still important?
Handwriting, the orthographic loop involves the sequential finger and hand movements for writing. Mm-hmm. Keyboarding does not. So there have been, for example, there's a study on students taking notes, and the question was, will the students taking notes on the computer do better than the students taking written notes? And certainly, from a personal point of view, when I heard that question, I thought, I can type every word I hear, but I don't have to be paying attention to do it. I might have to go back and then rethink the whole thing. But if I'm writing, I know I don't have time to write every word. I actually have to think about what I'm hearing and decide what's most important. So not only did they do better right after the note-taking exercise when they were asked questions, but they did better later and in applying those the information. So in short, keyboarding is a much more passive exercise. And what you're doing with your fingers, it's in a different place, but you're doing the same movement. With handwriting, formation of each letter has a unique sequence of movements. And if it's taught in a way that associates the name of the letter with what the letter looks like, and that specific unique sequence of movements for forming each one, then that carries over to reading and spelling in ways that keyboarding cannot. Now, I'm not going to throw away my computer. I mean, there's still things that I will always do in that way, but I do recognize that. A more recent study by Wiley and Rapp was the Arabic language, but it was a study on the effects of handwriting experience, studying the modality effects: typing, visual presentation, and writing. So with growing use of the internet, cell phones, tablets, the question was, how much time and resources should be spent on teaching handwriting? Which is essentially what your question was. So Wiley and Rapp conducted the training study, 42 adults, and compared the benefits of typing, visual presentation, handwriting. And basically, the big idea was that handwriting is a productive use of learning time. Handwriting practice, not the typing or visual tasks, resulted in much better performance on reading and spelling tasks that were not specifically taught. So the implications are that a subject assigned to the handwriting practice group used their knowledge of how to write to reinforce their spelling and reading of words. So the benefits of time spent practicing handwriting go far past just handwriting to letter recognition, word reading, spelling, categorizing, and memory.
This isn't just for students with dysgraphia, this is also all students.
Right. The other thing about writing, once it's written, you can look at it, you can analyze it, you can do something, and you can do that if you typed it also, but the question is the cognitive strength that goes into the actual writing seems to be connecting with deeper processing than just typing.
Definitely. So how is handwriting useful, you touched on this as well, but throughout a child's development? Is it useful beyond just when you're originally learning handwriting?
Well, interestingly, I'm going to start at the top and then go to the bottom, but with teachers taking our training courses, there are teachers who feel for their lesson plans, they may have a template they can fill in, they may have something where they can type the lesson plan, but many of them feel that if they actually write it, they learn it better, they understand it better, they think it through, and they catch mistakes or glitches that they might not catch if they're doing it in those other ways. And that's not certainly true for everyone. But if children learn, handwriting is not functional unless it's automatic, but nor is keyboarding, really, in terms of the automaticity and being able to use it functionally. So if students are not taught a way to make each letter, and they make the letter a different way every time, then they're not learning a sequence of movements that connects with the name of that letter and what the letter looks like. I'm not saying there's only one way to form letters. There are many correct ways to form most letters, but learning one way is the only way to get to automaticity.
Right.
So starting off that way, and in that study with Wolf, Abbott, and Berninger, in that classroom study, those children had a year to learn it every day. They learned a few letters, they learned to read and write words with those letters. They continued practicing those letters, learned a few more, but every day the handwriting instruction was integrated into the lesson, from skills, learning something new, to functional use of those skills. And as the year went on and they learned more and were able to do more, then the levels of functional use increased. Then they had another year in second grade to automatize and use the skills more, so that then they were automatic. Many times, if cursive is taught, the letters are taught. Sometimes they don't even teach the connections of the cursive letters. And then, well, you now know cursive. If they aren't required to use it, they're not going to practice it enough for it to become automatic.
Right.
Unfortunately, for better or for worse, there's no substitute for practice. But you need to practice what you want to remember, which is why learning an efficient sequence of movements for each letter that's unique to that letter is so important.
Definitely. So we've talked a lot about handwriting instruction and its importance. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about what would the ideal handwriting instruction look like in a classroom?
The best approach, well, the approach that was used in that study, the approach that I've used most extensively, it's the Slingerland approach. But what's important about it is that you're teaching reading, writing, spelling, handwriting, and even oral language all in an integrated way. So every lesson includes aspects of all of those, because reading doesn't occur in one spot in your brain. It's a reading network, and the integration is the part that doesn't always happen if there's a glitch or a weakness anywhere along the way. So teaching the letters for writing first that you're going to use in spelling and in reading, just a few, so they're getting lots of practice with that. Then more letters are added, more complexities in the words are added. The morphology comes into play. You're teaching suffixes and prefixes to add to bases. You're making kids aware of those meaningful units. You're also emphasizing in spelling and in reading not just the letter or saying, what do you hear, but what is your mouth doing? So if they're trying to spell splash and they spell spash, then your word is splash. Say splash. Now say spash. Was that the same word? No. So you've already spelled the first two sounds. So if we're using letters on a chart, they can see that. If not, say the first two sounds in the word sp. What's the next thing your mouth does? Instead of just what do you hear, what is the next thing your mouth does? If they again say spash, that would be spash. Your word is splash. Let's say it slowly. Say sp, as you already did. Sp. What's the next thing your mouth does when you're saying that word? And try to get them to stop. And when they feel that, oh, and they've already learned L, how to write it. They've learned a key word for L, and they've learned the sound, ul. So then they've got it, and they move on. That's just emphasizing in both reading and for spelling. There's a motor aspect. So in that orthographic loop for learning the patterns, or in that working memory piece where you're seeing the parts of the words that you're working with, there's also the motor aspect of the sequence of movements for forming them, and that's connected to the memory. So sometimes it's the kinesthetic memory that helps bring back the letter that you're looking for in the retrieval process. Whereas with the phonological loop, the motor aspect is connected to speech. So it's not just what does the letter look like, what do you hear? Those are speech sounds, they're not just sound. and that's really important as part of that. But the units are getting larger and larger, so then those words with additional morphemes added are put into phrases, the phrases into sentences, and then you're working toward dictation of paragraphs. And when you're reading, you start again. You start with the sound, the symbol sound, or the grapheme phoneme. Then you're decoding words, but everything you're doing, think of decoding and encoding as like addition and subtraction, two sides of the same coin. Certainly spelling gets more complicated when there are multiple spellings, but there's still a connection there. So we talked about the student who has dysgraphia, who may have difficulty have the impaired handwriting, and then we also said that it could be spelling, it could be the sequential movements of handwriting itself, or it could be a combination of both. And this is a question or an example of a student that had both difficulty with the letter formation and most certainly and very extremely with the spelling. He was in 5th grade, he was 11 years old, so he was in the 5th grade for the second time actually. And when he was being tested, he was not being tested because anybody thought he was particularly bright, but because they felt he was a slow learner kind of across the board. And the psychologist who was assessing him, asked him one of the verbal absurdity questions, what's wrong if the sun is shining at midnight? And he threw back his head and he said, I need more information. What part of the world is it? He was actually ended up in a pilot special day class for students who were intellectually gifted with dyslexia. And he certainly fit the bill. But as you can see here, he had a standard score of 58 for word reading, a standard score of 57 for spelling. And this is a kid whose tests out as intellectually gifted when reading and writing were not required. So he had difficulty with both the handwriting and then 5 months later, this is what he was able to do. Now, he still has a lot of words misspelled, but he's improved. He's gone to this is showing the words that he missed in case they couldn't tell. But his standard score has gone from 58 to 68 in 5 months. I mean, he has a long way to go, obviously.
Right.
But you can tell the qualitative differences in his spelling is that he knows now that every single syllable has to have a vowel sound, and he has a representative vowel sound in every single one of them. So whereas on the first one you couldn't even tell what the words were supposed to be, now you can pretty much figure out what most of them are. And his spelling went up to the standard score of 64, but still, I mean, that's hugely below average, not to mention how much of a discrepancy between what he's able to do intellectually and he hasn't learned yet. But he was on his way. And then this is a student who had even more difficulty with motor skills, even for non-language tasks, even for just drawing the figures. And his spelling had a standard score of 63 and a spelling standard score of 62. But you can see from the errors that he made, he has the visually similar letters like BD, he has those issues. He has CK at the beginning of words, so obviously his orthographic memory is questionable because CK never comes at the beginning of a word in English. But you see how in both cases they were giving everything they had to this task, and every one of them did their best to the very end. We stopped at the same point, but they didn't know it at all. They put a line to show it. It's what they were told to do. If they had any idea what any of the letters could be spelled, they put what those were. And this was that same student 5 months later. So he still didn't finish the marks. We didn't teach him to make the marks, but we did teach him to write in cursive. So he was using that. And again, there's still errors, but the quality of those errors are far different. And his standard score went from 63 to 104 in reading in 5 months, and from 62 to 88 in spelling. This is shows a 9th grader. This was actually in Dubai. It was a 4-week summer school, 3.5 hours of instruction a day. And this was his attempt to write single words on the first day. This does not look like a ninth grader's handwriting. It was in manuscript, but you see letter size relationships are off, the alignment is questionable, and there was a lot of emphasis was going to be put on morphology, and he did not have a sense of the spelling of the bases or the prefixes. Some more prefixes and suffixes than bases, but still. And this was 1 month later, where he spelled words that were of similar complexity, not exactly the same words. He still had some confusion between the base SCI, which means to know, K-N-O-W, as in science or conscious, and a base CISE, to cut. He still had some of that confusion there, but you can see him really working through using both the phonology and the morphology to spell. This shows that even in those lessons that you're teaching, not testing, you start with practicing those cursive letter connections that they're going to need when they write words here. So you're trying to prevent any errors or confusions that might occur. Then practicing the phoneme, grapheme, encoding, spelling. Here's an example of a lesson where we practiced the connections that he was going to need in that lesson. And then we did some morphological awareness practice, write the main spelling of the prefix that means with or together, the Latin prefix that means with or together, write the base element that means to trust. These were all things he was going to need later on in the lesson. And you see how that develops then into words and phrases. So always working from skills to functional use. And these are young adults in a pre-trial diversion program for San Francisco Mentor Court. These were all students who had gotten themselves into trouble, and they were given a chance of either jail time or literacy class. I don't know if they decided they made the right choice. But the thing that was daunting to me was that it was only once a week for 2 hours. And I knew that they could learn it, but I just didn't know if 2 hours a week was going to be enough to get them to move fast enough that they were going to be able to feel the progress. But so they started off with 0.3rd percentile, 55 standard score, 20 years old for spelling, and a year later, but only 2 hours a week instruction, there was a lot of improvement. So the standard score was 80 for spelling, the percentile, a whole number, 9th percentile. He still has mistakes, but the confidence even in the writing, he's using cursive, he's using a lot of the things that he learned, and it shows me so many things he hasn't learned yet that he still needed to learn. But motivation was never an issue there, and it wasn't just because of the consequence if they didn't.
What are some small changes, if needed, that general education teachers can make to help students to reap the benefits of handwriting?
I think the most important piece is that all of us have to understand that handwriting is only functional if it's automatic. Because in so many studies that we didn't talk about, the idea is if you're having to put energy in, how am I going to make this letter? You can't think, even if you had an idea of what you wanted to say, you have to then focus on how do I make each letter? How do I spell? How do I organize it on all the things? The handwriting can take care of the organization, the spatial, and that sequence of movements, and then there aren't so many things to keep in working memory. So just teaching the letters, even teaching all of the letters without practice with a few at a time, for most kids isn't going to work. It's not going to get them where. And even kids whose cursive might be more legible, at the beginning, it's still going to be slower because they're learning it. That was the reason, the importance of having those two years of instruction, 2 years of manuscript, and then 2 years of cursive. That wasn't done in the study, but that's what it would suggest. And so they go back to manuscript because it's faster, even though it's less. So practice makes permanent. So I think that means what I'm saying is that's not a little change, because it means every day, in a day that's already has so many demands on teachers' time, but that time is so well spent because it can make such a huge improvement. But just teaching the writing without integrating it with why you use writing, that doesn't get the kids where they need to be. They don't assume. It's like teaching kids to decode, and then they read a passage and they don't use anything that you taught them because you didn't teach them the I'm sure the teachers are assuming that you're learning to do this, so when you read connected text, you're going to be able to decode words. But you have to guide them into that and give them that practice. So it's a handwriting isn't a thing that you do over here. And remember the literacy networks, both for written language and the language networks, the oral language networks, the written language networks, they're all connected. Even when you're looking at the phonological loop, which is storing in working memory verbal information, but the memory part that's the strongest is often the articulation piece, which is motor. And with the orthographic loop, it goes to the motor for handwriting.
Nothing exists in a bubble.
Unfortunately, right? Or not. I mean, it's fortunate once you get all the pieces there to connect, but It takes time.
Definitely.
And it can't be done piecemeal. There always have to be the connections.
Absolutely.
So a comprehensive program including all the language arts skills reinforcing each other and time to practice those skills. You can't take shortcuts. But in the end, it takes less time, but you just don't know that until you get there. And there's a very wise teacher, Beth Slingerland, once said, "Speed is not the road to success. Careful practice is the road to speed." And I think that's such an important thing to remember. So if we try to get the kids to go faster than they can go, functionally, meaning correctly, then it slows them down because they're practicing mistakes. They know. We call it ideal speed or optimum speed, which is as fast as you can do what you're doing correctly and benefit from it. Say, if you read faster than you can comprehend, what's the point?
Right.
Same thing with writing. If you're going so fast that you don't feel that sequence of movements and you don't have control of your pencil, then you're not learning something that you can use. So it's that. And you also don't want to go so slowly that you're not getting the full sequence of movements for the whole letter. Because there are a number of studies that show that teaching students the actual sequence of movements, talking about it, making it real to them, not just feeling it, but also being able to put words to it, helps then to connect. In the studies that look at teaching letters to children, teaching them to write the letters at the beginning connects to reading. So when you once you've learned to write a letter, when you look at a letter, even though you're not writing it, the part of your brain that has to do with the formation of that letter is activated at the same time you're looking at it, and vice versa.
Well, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me about it.
And thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you, and thank you for your thoughtful questions.
Thank you for listening to the LDA podcast. To learn more about LDA and to get valuable resources and support, visit ldaamerica.org.